So we're here and we're talking, having a great conversation with the Reverend Richard Gilbert. And I'm here, Verdis LeVar Robinson, with Julia Jones, and we're Meadville students, hopefully in our last year. You know, you never know. This is a changing world, right? So,
Every minute.
right, every minute, right? And so we're just going to go ahead on with some questions that we have about your perspective on faith formation and religious education and the way the pandemic has shifted some things and some of your thoughts, your hopes and a little bit of your guidance as well from all of your experience. um, and even while we're going through these questions, feel free to tell us more about your experience and share some stories with us, and this will be part of our project. But if you will, this will hopefully be a stable part of the course for future classes and generations of Meadville students to come to look back at this incredible time that we're in right now. I'm trying to be positive.
Right.
It's an incredible time
Right.
that we're in right now with all of its ebbs and flows and and
Oh,
pivots
no.
and
Well,
so
I've told the ministers, I meet pretty actively with the local UU clergy, and I say how much I admire them to do ministry in this strange new world we're facing.
Yeah.
Because I went through some tough times in terms of historical context and everything, but nothing quite like this. Nothing quite like this.
yeah. So in your perspective, what has been the impact or impacts on the pandemic on faith formation and religious education?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to admit that I'm a dinosaur. I've been retired in the ministry formally since 2005. I left the First Unitarian Church in 2002. So I haven't had that direct responsibility. I did 3 years of interim after I retired retirement in 2002, and then 3 years of interim. So that's my perspective now is as a congregant, or I've been a congregant at First Universalist since I really retired. And when I did formal religious education in First Unitarian Church of Cleveland, we had a church school of 750 kids. And I was the administrator of that school. Angus McLean was the minister of education then, and he was kind of the philosophical guru with whom I had constant contact, and he did some adult education and consulted with me all the time. But it was like a lot of administration and a lot of recruiting teachers and worship leaders and so forth. So it was the class method. Everybody had a class. First grade, it was a big enough school, so it was class oriented, smaller class, 2 services. That's all blown out of the water now, as far as I can tell. As I read and talk with people, the whole idea of having a class, of having a Martin and Judy from the old days,
Right.
every Sunday for 25 Sundays, that model is just gone. Plus the fact there are so many distractions for kids nowadays. Sunday morning hockey, Sunday morning basketball, travel teams, arts programs. There's so much in the world that our kids do, that the idea that they're going to be sitting in their little chairs
Right.
in a friendly little circle around their teacher every single Sunday for 40 Sundays is probably a model that's it's gone by the wayside. So I'm in that sense, I'm a dinosaur, because that was the way I did it in Cleveland, and to some extent in Rochester. We had a large church school, and we had classes, grade based and so forth. And so I've been interested to see how people have adapted. But the big change in the last few months with this pandemic is virtual learning, and the kids have had virtual learning in school.
Yeah.
And I guess they are probably sick of virtual learning now. Here in Rochester, kids are pretty much going to school now, masked. And that's another feature too. When you put the mask on, it's just amazing what it does, not only in terms of recognizing faces, but seeing expressions. And so much of teaching is that expression, the smile, the frown, the whatever expressions we have, that it limits all that. So even the Zoom has been, I think Zoom has saved us to a great extent because we've been able to have some contact that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, that's a very limited thing, and we've realized how important person to person is. And recapturing that is a real tough job in the world we live in. So I refer you in a way to Sheila Hsu. Sheila Hsu is the RE director at First Unitarian. She has done a lot of things, stories. I have been on, that's at First Unitarian Church, my old church. She has done stories and family worship services, and being able to take advantage of all the technology that she's had for telling stories. And that's in at First Universalist too. We're now putting stories on the picture book, sometimes online. And so people can tell stories in that way. So I think we need to take advantage as we must of the technology available to us and be creative. I mean, I had a Zoom conversation with my high school class of 1954 this morning. And I said, I would love to have been able to do some share screening with them. I didn't know how to do it.
Right.
We've got, I mean, let's face it, all ministers and educators, RE people now, have to be technologically savvy, that I'm not. And to teach technology, not so much as a hindrance, which it has been in some ways, but as a help. So I think it's helped to save us.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure the public schools and lots of other groups outside the religious world have developed the skills of technology much more than we have in our churches. Although the nice thing about this Zoom business, and for ministers, challenging, that our people can go to church anywhere, anytime they want to. If I want to go to the service and hear John Buren's preach in San Francisco, well, I'll do it. Boom, just like that. And I'll skip my church. And so people have this opportunity, which is both good and bad. But it does open opportunities, and same thing for RE. It would be really interesting. Hi, is your cat there?
Yeah, that's Prince Caspian of Vermont.
Okay. Anyway, but the opportunities for technological things are great, and we should take advantage of them. And even though it will never replace, I'm sure it will never replace the person-to-person touching, emotionally touching, sitting down beside people, giving hugs, all that stuff that's so much a part of our religious experience. They'll never replace it, but we have to do our best.
Yeah.
And as I said, I can't recall if this is on the recording or not, that our coffee hours have been much more meaningful because we've had breakout rooms. And so you can get to talk, you are forced to, I don't want to say forced in the negative sense, but obliged to, if you participate, talk with people that you would never otherwise talk with. You would normally in a coffee hour go to your friends and you would chit chat about that. But with the breaking out into different groups, you have the opportunity to meet new people and have significant conversations. And Julia, you were mentioning how some of your folks in your church said how much more meaningful the conversations were because they were in this virtual community and not sitting around with a coffee cup and chatting about the weather or the Buffalo Bills in our case or whatever. Right. It would be the poor Chicago Bears.
About the Bears this
Sorry
year.
about that. Sorry, we don't talk. The Bills, it all hangs on Monday night with the Patriots. Anyway. Although those are my initial thoughts on the impact, it's obviously personal, and we're getting back. We've had our first few in-person services, and it's like a homecoming. It's like a whole new church.
Yeah.
Even though we're spread out, we have attractive ropes. We have people at First Universalist. It's a small church in a fairly good sized building. We have people in the balcony.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole new experience. In the olden days, they had people all over the church. They had a huge congregation of several hundred. Now it's
Right.
100, 150, something like that. And we would get normally about 100 people in attendance at the virtual, and I think roughly that. And now we do hybrids. We are there, those of us who want to be there and feel safe being there with our masks and with our vaccination certificates. We can be there. And also there are people online who aren't safe, don't feel safe being there, can be there. So it's, and we haven't learned yet how to connect the hybrids, although I did mention to you in a small church how the worship leader had the people, the virtual people on screen introduce themselves, and the people in the congregation live introduce themselves. So there was a sense of community, even though only half the congregation was actually present. But it was a nice feeling. In a smaller church, you could do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for kids, I don't know how kids are relating. I have grandkids now, so I don't know how kids do with their virtual connections. But they're always on their screens.
Right.
I sit in the car picking up my grandchildren from a basketball game or something. They get in the car and I start to ask about the game, and I realize they're already on their screens.
Right. Right.
So we have to figure out how to get on that screen somehow, or how to take advantage of their interest in the screen.
That's what I'm sort of hearing a lead in to that second question about what congregations need the most, what their immediate needs are for faith formation and religious education. I hear that maybe you're saying technology, but you may have other thoughts about what would be the most helpful immediately.
Well, going back to an old talk of Dorothy Spurl, she talked about kids. They were asked, not surveyed so much as asked, what organizations to which they related. And many of them put the church either last or not at all. And so somehow we have to keep the kids connected with the church. So many people now, I think people sympathetic with our point of view, are spiritual but not religious. Or they have a spiritual sense, but no sense of connecting with the community. And I think that lacks nourishment. I think it's important that we grow our faith together. And so I still believe in the religious community as much as I did a building your own theology. But the whole point of that was we did it as a group. We have our differences and we build our own theologies, but in the context of a group, we learn together. And that's why I loved that class, teaching that class, because it brought together people who had different ideas about God and could talk about it and talk about their experiences, their spiritual odysseys. So that was really important. So somehow to keep the kids connected. And one way, and I grew up in a small country church, I was the custodian a good bit of the time. I mean, we kids did everything. We helped clean windows and so on and so forth. And there are jobs for kids to do now, service jobs, not only around the church, but in the community. I found that some of our most meaningful experiences were getting the kids out. And it's harder now with the pandemic because there are limits to that. But I can recall taking the youth group in Cleveland. We went to a football game. Now that may not sound very religious. On the other hand, the going and coming to the football game and interfacing with their minister in an informal setting, I think was important for the kids, important for me and the parents who went along. It's a fun thing, and they got to know each other. And so I think all those things that we can do, even outside the classroom, and lots of these things are outside the classroom, are important. But I took the kids here in Rochester to a habitat for an interfaith habitat for humanity, which is in the inner city, and that I think that was a good experience for them. One of our kids is now a New York State Assemblywoman. In fact, I spoke with her. She and I were speakers at a local Planned Parenthood rally, and I was so proud. I hadn't seen her in years, but I've been meeting her because I've been lobbying her. She's not my Assemblywoman, but I do a regional kind of thing. So it was good to see that, I don't know that we were responsible for it because her parents were very active. Her mother is still active in our church. Her father doesn't come very much. But that we grew this kid who's now taking our values into the public arena. And I think probably the kind of things that we did with the kids, they did a lot of soup kitchen work. The youth group went down to a Roman Catholic worker food station downtown, and served a meal once a week. And what great experiences they had. They talked about that. When I did the Religion in Life, I took them to Boston. That was another field trip. I think it was really meaningful to them when they got to go to, well, what was then 25 and then 78 Beacon Street for the service committee, and visit the churches. And we visited the 3 downtown churches, the King's Chapel, First and Second, and Arlington Street Church. And we broke them into groups, and they could compare notes before they fell asleep on the bus on the way back. And those are experiences, those special experiences are the things that the kids remembered a lot more than the regular stuff they got Sunday morning. Although I think there is a certain, what I call spiritual osmosis. That was a centerpiece, I think, of this book, certainly, which was kind of my RE philosophy, and probably implicit in this one, which is an anthology of the history and philosophy and so on. But I found the kids related to those special experiences, and as Dorothy Sproul pointed out, the high holy days, the Christmas Eve things that they did, the pageants they did, and all that kind of thing. So these special experiences, and now absent the regular classroom that I grew up with and that I had my first years of ministry, these have added importance because you probably only get them for some of these special kinds of things. And so, but putting them in touch with people, with good people, teachers, ministers, lay people, parents, is all to the good. And since service in the community was important too. And I'm surprised at the number of churches now that are sending kids to Central America to dig wells and things of this sort. All those are just great experiences. I mean, you just can't. And my own son, this is in the olden days, when he was a 16-year-old, which is about 40 years ago, he went to a program sponsored by UUSC in Denver. About 6 or 8 UU kids went out, and they lived with UU families out there. Daytimes, they worked for the Salvation Army, they worked for Planned Parenthood, they were volunteers. And then at night, 2 nights a week, they would come together to share experiences. And with Marty Griffith, who was an intern for us here in Rochester, she sadly died in the middle of her life in her 40s. But then on the alternate nights, they went to Red Rocks for concerts with her and so forth. She was a musician. So just a great full experience. And I had that for the service committee, University Service Committee, going to Europe for a couple summers. Joyce and I led a group of interfaith kids, really, to Suffolk, Virginia, where the Universalists had the Jordan Neighborhood House. This is an old neighborhood house, settlement house in the Old South. And we spent a summer there, and the experiences they had when the sheriff visited, because we were an integrated group and we were working in the Black community primarily. All these are experiences that I think that resonate. They certainly resonate with me. When the sheriff came one night in dinner and threatened us, and when my wife was picked up for speeding one time in a microbus full of these 8 kids going up a bridge, and then I had to go, and I didn't bail her out, but luckily we knew the Norfolk reporter whom we had befriended, who saw us, and the police, when they saw him and knew that might be a story coming, backed off and let her go. So, these are experiences you put yourself in a position to have them, and then you've got to have them and then reflect on them.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things. So I'm being long-winded here, but
No, it's great.
the main thing is to keep the kids connected with the congregation in some way, for the congregation to be out there in the community, as well as doing fun things, the pageants and the parties and so forth, square dances we used to have, and all that stuff. Kids remember that as much as anything. That's the spiritual osmosis. When you put them in life situations with good people, that's part of the learning.
That is, if you had a magic wand, I'm always talking about these magic wand questions, you know. I mean, because if I say if you had $1 million, but you know, these days $1 million doesn't get you that far.
Doesn't feel like a magic wand anymore.
I know.
Right? If you had $10 million, no.
Right.
If you had a magic wand, where would you like to see religious education and faith formation go? You can, I mean, in this kind of changing world, you can, I mean, even if the pandemic wasn't even here,
Right.
where would you like to see faith formation and religious education for babies all the way up to our elders go?
Yeah. Well, I have two thoughts. One thought, or at least two thoughts, but one thought is in my day, we were focused on curriculum as books. And there were some very good books I still use from long ago in many lands. Those are classic tales. And yet there are very few times you have a class where you can deal with them. But I've often thought, why don't we somehow get some of these rich books that have continuing value, like From Long Ago in Many Lands, Beginnings of Earth, Sky, Life and Death. I mean, they're not out of date. Maybe the scientific part of Beginnings of Earth and Sky, Life and Death are. Sophie Foz wrote that, 50, 60, maybe 70, 80 years ago, when science has changed a lot since then. But these are classic tales. And I think these are things that probably we're not going to be able to do much with them in the church and the church school because of the lack of formal classes. But why not get these books into the homes and to have the kids reading these books and the parents reading the books to them? It's a shame to waste them. There's some really rich material there, but we can't deliver it anymore because we don't have that kind of formal classes that we used to have, when each week we take one of the myths of creation and we read it and talk with the kids about it. So that has to go home. And so parents, who of course are the main religious educators anyway, can be charged with saying, you should get a library of a certain book. We should figure out the library of some of the basic books that we want our kids to know about, to know the books on world religions, books on race, ethnic things, on War and Peace, Man-Made. Have you ever heard of that book? Tom Gall wrote it. He's a Quaker.
Okay.
And it's a book of different efforts over history to build a world of peace, and winding up with the story of the United Nations. Now, this book was written in the 60s, probably something, ancient book, probably discarded, but it has stories that are still relevant, and they obviously need to update the stories, but it's a wonderful book for teenagers or for adults for that matter. And it's a shame to have that book just collect dust on some shelf somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. That is the whole rich library that we have, to deliver that into the homes where it hopefully would be used. The other thing I think is to do more of the service projects, things like that. We did, and there are endless opportunities for them, and lots of churches are doing them. So this is nothing unique. What might be unique is doing service projects with other churches. We did some of that in our church school in Rochester, and we did a project in Rochester. We happened to have some money at the end of the year, amazing, a surplus in the church budget, and we thought, what do we do with this? Well, sock it away for a rainy day. Well, no, some people said, let's invest it in the community. And so we started looking around in the community. We consulted with the mayor and the mayor's assistant and some neighborhood groups that our people had contact with. And we finally happened on an inner city school, school number 32, I think, Verdis, you might know it, I don't know. It's where the Lawrence Tracy playground is now.
Yeah, I think that's 32.
Okay. Anyway, we worked with them. We had a meeting at the school. They came for a dance at the church. So we integrated the school, the neighborhood population, the church population for a time anyway, and finally raised enough money to build a playground. And this is in cooperation. What in this community do you need? And they said, we've got this space with nothing in it except a backstop. They played baseball there. And Larry Tracy, Father Tracy, was a great guy, great activist, was there. And they named that space for him, I think. And but we got permission to build one of these state-of-the-art playgrounds there. And so one Saturday I was on sabbatical, and so I missed it. And in the rain, the whole congregation, or not the whole congregation, but many of the congregations came with the community people and laid out this playground, which was a pre-assembled playground. And what we didn't do, and I regret that, is have some reflection. My feeling is that we help these kids to have experiences like this, but we need to have a time to reflect. What does this mean for my faith? What does this mean for being a Unitarian Universalist? What are the values? What were the problems you saw there? What other religious faiths did you find there that were problematic for you? That's what Marty did in Denver with these kids who had been in service groups all during the day, and then they met in the evening to reflect on what it meant. So it's the experience, it's a praxis, it's the experience, the reflection, the experience back and forth. There's this dialogue between the two. So more experiences like that, I think, are really important. Our kids still are primarily in suburbs. And we need to find experiences that get them into contact with kids from other racial, ethnic, sexual orientation, as many varieties of people as you can think of. And we have to invent ways to find them there. They find them some in the schools. Today I was on a conference call with a foundation that's looking to invest some money in the city of Rochester. And I mentioned one thing, and Verdis, I don't know if you've heard about this. It's called Good Schools for All. The program started at Third Presbyterian Church. It's gotten some money from the Rochester Area Community Foundation. They've done some exploring. We tried years ago. We've got just Julia, you probably know Rochester is one of the old Rust Belt cities.
Oh yeah.
We've got a city of rich and poor. It's a tale of two cities. I live in the city, in an old middle-class part of the city, but the city is high on the list of poverty, and child poverty. We're right at the top. It's a very, very economically unfair and dispersed. Right. And so they tried years ago, one of the people running for county legislature, Bill Johnson, Mayor Johnson, was our first Black mayor here in Rochester. We inaugurate our third Black mayor coming up in January.
Malik Evans.
Anyway, Malik Evans, you know Malik?
Oh yes, we're Facebook friends.
Oh, good. Oh, good. I need to get his email address because I'm trying to set up a program on universal basic income, and I want to find out where he stands on it to invite him to a panel discussion. Okay. So offline, maybe send him any contact information that he won't resent. Okay.
All right.
Anyway, where was I going with that? The proposal is, we've had a county school system was proposed, shot down. Suburban people want no part of it. Most suburban people. The suburbs are changing. Suburbs are integrating somewhat now, but still probably a non-starter. But what they want to do is have magnet schools that are countywide through the BOCES program. So they could be anywhere in the county, magnet schools about different interest groups, and drawing from both city kids and suburban kids. The suburban urban thing was hard. You skim off some of the best urban kids to put in the suburbs. They may have a hard time there, bad experience. It's been a mixed bag. It was a well-intentioned thing and maybe good for a lot of kids, but a very often mixed bag. But this would be countywide. And so this foundation, of which I'm a board member, is thinking about funding that. So programs like this is a public school program, of course, but we have another program here in Rochester. starting out of interfaith work. I was directing an interfaith forum for a number of years. UUs are always in interfaith work, which is good. But this came out of Nazareth College. They have a program of interfaith studies, and they bring in high school kids from the whole county area. One day, they 400 to 500 kids, and they have workshops for them so they can learn about other faiths. I get to do the one on no faith, atheists, agnostics, humanists. That's the one I get to do. But I slip a little UUism in there too. I do it with a humanist rabbi. But this is a great thing because all these kids get together. Now, this is on the public school basis, but Nazareth College states it. So plugging into that, maybe an existing program or starting a program like that. But I think how good it is for these kids, all colors, classes, creeds, all get together in a big assembly. They eat together, their speeches and so forth, of course, and then they go off to these seminars, and they come back together again at the end of the day. But what a great connection to see these kids all talking together about different religions than they've been accustomed to. And I've had Catholics kids raise questions with me that I thought no Catholic kid would ever ask. It's been a great experience for the teachers as well as the students. So some of these programs I think are really important, and some already exist. Others are just waiting to be started. So if I had a magic wand, I would connect our congregations with a lot of these programs.
Yeah.
And I would also train our kids in what I call advocacy work. Some of the religious groups have interns who work with political figures and learn that way, because one of the main ways I think that we express our faith is in the political realm. And we're very naive there, and we need to sharpen our tools a great deal because, quote, the other side, the more conservative folks, sharpen their tools, and they are educating their kids in many ways, high school and college, to be activists for their causes. And I think they really outflank us very often.
So before we get to our last question, I just wanted to let you know that I'm not sure if you're aware, but I am a product of that urban suburban interdistrict.
Oh, are you really? Okay.
So I grew up.
How did you feel about it? How was it for you?
Well, I grew up the street from the church, really. I mean, like down around Hudson Avenue, that area. Mm-hmm. Very, very low income area. We lived in the project.
Well, I took your tour. I went on your tour.
Right,
and you showed us where you're growing up. Yes.
Yeah, I showed you where I grew up in Chatham Gardens apartments, and which look very, very nice now. They didn't look nice back when I grew up in them. And then they bused me from first grade out to the suburban schools. So my experience was a positive one because I went early. People that were bused in from 9th grade could not really assimilate, and I had to assimilate. And so I went to a white school, because I went to Brighton, so it was predominantly Jewish, but I went to a Black church. So I was all messed up and all confused, and I still am. But I was never deemed as one of those city kids. That's what they used to call us.
Because they grew up with you.
Because they grew up with me. But other ones that were coming in, I saw how they were being treated. Yeah. Very, very interesting.
Those are the mixed results. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I'll write a book about it one day. But
do that. It really speaks to our need to stick with things, I think in education, as in church programming, so often we try something new and then we don't like the immediate results, so we move on to the next thing, when if we had waited long enough, it's possible that it could have been really beneficial. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
One more thing, just popped into my head as we go, things I wish I had thought to say earlier. And one is, one of the most gratifying religious education experiences I've had is leading the religion and life class at First Unitarian. This was a year-round class, and the way we worked it was we had 4 sessions when kids were invited and maybe by their parents required to come. And we did 4 basic sessions on, these were high school kids, these young high school kids. And then at the 4th session, they got to choose, they would continue or they could drop out. No questions asked. They could just work that out with their parents. I wouldn't know until the next session.
Right.
Anyway, the point was, Helena Chapin and I did it. It was the ministers doing it. So often ministers farm out youth group and some other activities to lay people. And I think it's really good for at least quite a few of the kids to get to know their minister pretty well. And so that's just one of the best experiences I've had. And we had mixed, I learned what teaching high schoolers was like a little bit then. Because it was Sunday evening for a couple hours. And we ate together, and then we had sessions together, a lot of discussion, role playing, and so on. And then, of course, I mentioned the other piece of resistance. We took them to Boston,
right?
And that was fun. Of course, they have a ball on the bus, and so on and so forth.
Right.
And then we had them do a Sunday, and quite often the Sunday, a youth Sunday, what's your youth Sunday? It was Religion and Life Sunday when they reached. This is a Scout Church Award. I grew up on the church of the God and Country Award, and when I decided to become a minister at 14. But this is Religion and Life Award, and we gave either that through the Scout. There was a few of them went through Scouts. Most of them we gave a flaming chalice pendant, so they had something tangible to wear, and that was a really good experience. And gave the kids a chance. Well, some of them would prefer to read or usher or something like that, but a lot of them wanted to say something. And so they got to preach 3-minute homilies, reflecting on their time in Boston or what they learned, or it was their shot. We never knew what they would say. It was scary. You never knew. Half a dozen kids up there with 3 minutes each to say what they wanted to talk about. It was really good. So that kind of thing. Real contact, significant contact with the minister I think was important.
Yeah.
What
other advice would you have for aspiring ministers and learning?
They have to hang loose.
Process.
And I'm one. I mean, I love the old session. I love the curriculum and the classes and playing class lessons and all this sort of thing. I loved it, and that's what we did for so many years. But I think, unless I'm wrong, that model is not working very well. I see groups doing monthly programs based on the worship theme of the adult congregation sometimes. Lots of different kind. So I guess the main advice is to hang loose and think of spiritual osmosis. Think of the different variety of contacts that kids, positive contacts that kids can have with the congregation, the people in it, and the community that surrounds it. I like James Luther Adams' designation. The church is a spiritual center with a civic circumference. I think that's just of course, he taught it, Meadville, Lombard, along with Harvard and other places, Andover, Newton. So that's spiritual center with the civic circumference, to me, is a great model for it. And hanging loose and remembering that the parents are still going to be the main religious educators. And so you've got to educate the parents. So adult education is also religious education for children, because the better you bring up the adults and help them to grow, the more positive impact they will have on the kids. Oh, one thing in plugging some of our formal programs, the OWL program. When I grew up, it was about your sexuality. And before that, you wouldn't believe the stuff that Boston was putting out. I mean, paper mache cutouts. Oh God, it was incredibly naive and unhelpful and so forth. So About Your Sexuality was a great step forward. And then Our Whole Lives was a great step forward. And what we learned was that the kids who graduated from that class, when they went off to college, they became the religious educators, the sexuality educators on their hall. They had been through this. They had learned about say no if you want to say no. They learned about relationships, that sexuality is in the context of a whole human relationship. They learned all the good stuff in our OWL classes. And so when they got to college, kids coming from no sexuality education or bad sexuality education look to them to be the leaders. And so, and that argues that one program, and there are probably a few programs that should be still in a class session because you just can't do it ad hoc. And OWL certainly is one of them. There are probably a few others that there ought to be. So we have to be very flexible and know when to be informal and do field trips and that kind of thing, and when to say, well, here's a course, you've got to commit to this course. You've got to be there for all the time. It just doesn't work if you're in and out of this class. And it's a worthwhile class. And most kids, pretty much my experience has been, kids are pretty eager to take it. Taught not by their parents, of course, but taught by people who have been trained to teach the course. It's one of those few courses that we really take seriously, the training of teachers. We tried to take seriously the training of teachers and everything else too, but this was very intensive. And so I confess I am not up to speed on all the stuff that's coming out of Boston now, so I can't really comment about that. But I think ministers ought to digest all that stuff, and with their congregation, with their RE committees and adult education committees, and with some kids involved too, develop programs that will meet needs, given what we have now in a pandemic world, in a world where there are so many, as I say, distractions for kids' time, and kids are so much under pressure. But I still stick with my theory of spiritual osmosis, that the greater variety and richness of experience that kids have in the church, whether it be in a classroom, at a church supper, a pageant, a work project, whatever it is, all that is to the good. And I think we need to take it so seriously that we not only provide the experience, but then the reflection on the experience. So they put it in some kind of a framework. And the thing that always bothers me, and it's a bewildering problem still, is that so many of our kids don't wind up in UU churches. Now, I've been lucky. I'm one out of two. One of my sons is very active in a Fourth University. The other, the Hardy School, which you know, Verdis, the Hardy School functions as church for him because the Hardy School, which is an independent school here in Rochester, but they do a lot of community work. They have programs all over the place. They deliberately enrich their student body, so they have quite a variety of backgrounds. And it's college prep, pretty much, although one of our grandsons isn't going to college, so he went through it and is not going to college, so who knows, but still a good experience. So I'm one out of two, and so many of our kids, this one kid that I mentioned, who's now the state assemblywoman, I asked her point blank one time, are you still going to church? Because I don't go to my old church anymore, and she's not. I don't know what she's doing for church, but that may not be counted as a failure because she's doing important work in the world. Right. So we have to, and that gets into maybe a final statement, the need to evaluate. There was a booklet years 50, 60 years ago by Dr. Milton Sen, who was the developmental psychologist at Yale, as I recall, and a UU. And he bemoaned the fact that with all this avant-garde educational stuff we did not do much evaluating. We have really fallen down in any kind of evaluation. I can't tell you exactly what kind of evaluation to have, but we need to evaluate what we're doing. So often we just do it and then heave a sigh of relief. And so evaluation is an important part of this whole process. And the kids can maybe tell us, might be good to get, in fact, we did, I think for a while, have a session with the seniors. How has the church school, if we did there's some religion in life, how has the church school been for you? What was your experience like? And we got an earful, believe me, good and bad.
Well, I'm not going to speak for Julia, but I can see on her face that she agrees with me that This has been such a delight, a joy, a privilege to sit here with you over Zoom and three different locations, three different states,
That's right.
and have a great conversation with you. And so thank you so much. And Julia, you have anything that you would like to
Oh,
say?
it's just been such a privilege, and it's really wonderful as a former public educator myself to hear you saying some of the things that I know are true about education, but somehow we don't always bring them into faith formation and the importance of reflection. We do it all the time in seminary, right? But it doesn't always happen in church. And it was really helpful to have you connect those dots for me personally, and I'm sure will be for other seminarians if they are lucky enough to hear what you have to say in addition to reading it in your work. I'm so grateful for this chance to talk to you. It was really wonderful to meet you.
Well, thank you. It's been fun for me too. I love to ramble on.
We
And I'm
appreciate
glad my books are being used, or book, I don't know what you're doing with it, but I worked very hard on those books, and I was so hopeful that they would get some use, because they come from a lot of experience. 60 plus years in the ministry, this ministry, and growing up as a Universalist.
Yeah.
Born and bred. I'm one of the rare ones, born and married to a born Universalist.
That is rare.
Yeah, it is. So we both grew up on Martin and Judy.
Well, we appreciate you, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck with your coursework. Carry on.